Hello everyone, this is Sabita Sunkara and today's equal interview question is how would you design a generic ETL framework that can process multiple files dynamically? So this is one of the most frequently asked question for senior SQL developers, ETL developers and data engineers with 10 to 15 years of experience. So the interviewer is not checking whether you know SSIS or SQL. They are checking whether you can design a reusable, scalable, production ready ETL framework. So let's understand the with a real time production scenario. So imagine you are working in a banking or healthcare project. Every day, nearly 100 different files arrive from multiple source systems. For example, customer accounts, transactions, loans, or cards are all in .csv files. Now, tomorrow, the business says we are adding another 20 new files. So, the interviewer asks, will you create 20 new SSIS packages? The answer is no. If we create one package for every file, maintenance becomes very difficult. So, whenever a new file is added, we have to develop, test, deploy, and maintain another package. So, that's not how enterprise ETL solution are built. So, instead, we design one generic framework that can process any file dynamically using configuration. So, how it will be? The first step is to design a configuration driven framework. Then, instead of hard coding everything inside the SSIS package, we have to store all file related information in configuration tables. For every file, we store information such as file name or pattern, source path, target table, delimiter, batch size, active flag, retry count, and watermark or key column. So now the SSIS package does not need to know anything beforehand. So it simply reads the configuration table and process the appropriate file. That means if tomorrow a new file arrives, we no need to modify the package. It simply insert one new row into the configuration table. The same package automatically start processing the new file. So this makes the framework reusable, scalable and very easy to maintain. Then now let's see how the framework process each file. First, the package reads the configuration table. Then based on the configuration, it identifies which files are active and ready for processing. Next, it validates the input file. It checks what does it the file exist, or is the file size greater than 0, or is the header correct, then has this file already been processed. So only after successful validation does the package continue. Next, what happened? The data is loaded into stage tables. So stage tables act as a temporary storage where the raw data is stored exactly as received. So after loading into the stage table, data validation begins. So here we have to verify record counts, then mandatory columns and null values, then duplicate records, then business rules. So only after all validations are successful is the data loaded into the target tables using insert, update or merge logic. So once completed, the audit tables are updated with execution details such as row count, execution time and status. So finally, the processed file is moved to the archive folder so that it won't be picked up again. Then how do we handle error or monitoring? So a good ETL framework is not just about loading data. It's about handling failures intelligently. So before processing, we have to validate that the file is exist or not. Then the file is not empty. Also, the file format is correct. Then the header matches the expected structure. Then the file has not already been processed. Then the record count is valid. During execution, every activity is recorded in audit tables. For example, ETL control tables or execution log or error log, retry log, file archive log. So these, if any step fails, the error details are captured immediately in the logs. In the If the retry count allows, the framework retries automatically after a configured interval. If all retries fail, an email notification is sent to the support team with complete error details. The failed file is moved to an error or reject folder for investigation. Because of this approach, the framework becomes reliable, easy to monitor, and capable of recovering from failures with minimum manual effort. So, now let's answer this exactly as we would in an interview. If the interviewer asks, how would you design a generic ETL framework? Then our answer would be, instead of creating separate ETL packages for every file, I would design a configuration driven ETL framework. All file metadata such as a file name, source path, target table, delimiter, batch size, business rules, and retry count would be stored in a configuration tables. So a generic SSIS package would read this configuration and file and process files dynamically. So before loading data, the package would validate file existence, file size, header and duplicate processing, like that. Then data would first be loaded into stage tables, then validated again as business rules, and then loaded into target tables. So every execution would be logged into control, audit and error tables for complete traceability. If any step fails, the framework would automatically retry based on the configured retry count, send email notification if required, and moved failed files to an error folder. So, successfully processed files would be archived. So, making the framework reusable, scalable, easy to maintain, and capable of processing new file types without any code changes. So, notice one important thing. I did not say simply I will create an SSIS package to load the files. So instead I explained everything entire enterprise ETL design. So that should be a configuration driven architecture. So dynamically file processing and stage and target loading, then validation at every step. Also, we are auditing and monitoring, then automatic retry mechanism. Also, we are handling error and notifications, then file archiving, then support for new files without code changes. That exactly the level of thinking interviews expect from a senior SQL developers, ETL leads, or data engineers with 10 to 15 years of production experience. Thanks for watching. Follow for more advanced SQL interview questions based on real world production scenarios. Thank you.